Now new this morning, some students from Duluth will be making their way near the nation's capital this weekend to make their mark. Team Minnesota is heading to National History Day to compete at the University of Maryland. The competition consists of students grades 6 through 12 to dive themselves in a history topic and conduct a research project presentation. Recently, students competed in Minnesota's State History Day in the cities. Nearly 2,000 students competed in the competition. Of those, 59 were named winners and qualified to represent Minnesota on the national level, including some Northlanders. Duluth East student Anja Erickson said that learning more about history helped her grow and become involved in the world around her.
I think every single one of our projects kind of wraps in with that of we can have a new way of thinking about things, and I think that's really helpful when people are trying to kind of emerge as leaders.
Now, students were given the theme of rights and responsibilities. There were a few different ways they could compete, like write a paper, make a documentary, or even create a website. The national contest will take place this Sunday, June 8th until the 12th. Nearly 3,000 students will compete.